Good evening, gamers, and welcome to episode 10 of Games with Dave. Tonight, I am joined by author and game designer Geoff Bottone. Geoff has designed an awesome game called BoldlyGo, which is based on a very popular sci-fi franchise, which will remain unnamed at this time. Welcome to the show, Geoff. I'm glad to have you on. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Oh, So I guess to get started, I was really curious as to which came first. Was it Jeff Quest or Boldly Go, then led to Jeff Quest? And what can you tell me about the genesis of both the game and the company?
So Jeff Quest came first by a long shot. It was something I sort of came up with in my 20s a long time ago because it was like, oh, I'd like to have like a game company. What would I call it? And I settled on the name Jeff Quest because it's my name, so it's easy to remember. And Quest is like a 5-letter word, and Jeff is a 5-letter word. And if you put them next to one another, it looks, I don't know, nice and balanced. Um, And then that got put in a drawer because for a while, in the early 2000s to about 2010, I was with a company with some friends of mine called Slugfest Games, which I don't know if you've heard of. Um,
I have not. I'm gonna have to
okay,
check it out. Is it still
they
around
uh, they,
or?
they are still around. I no longer well, I am no longer part of the company, but I do some freelance writing for them. Mostly for their most famous product, the Red Dragon Inn card game, which I helped to design back in the day.
That sounds familiar. I want to say I've heard of that, so I guess I have heard of Slugfest games.
That's cool. It's funny because there's a mix of people who are like, I don't know what that is, and I say Red Dragon Inn, and they're like, oh, and then there's another group of people who's like Red Dragon Inn, and they say, no, still haven't heard of you. And I'm like, that's fine, that's fine. There's a lot of games, no big deal. So, let's see. But so I 2010, I had a lot of life changes and stuff happen. So Slugfest and I, we parted ways, but we're still friends. We still talk. And I still do, like I said, freelance work for them. And I sort of allude to this in the beginning of the book, but I started getting really into, I don't know if you've heard of Red Letter Media, the Plinkett reviews, anything like that.
It sounds familiar, but I can't say with 100% certainty. Yes, I know that.
Oh, okay. That's okay. So very briefly, they did this review of Star Wars, which was absolutely scathing, but it was also from a filmmaker's perspective. So it talks a lot about like story structure and stuff like that. But they also did a bunch of stuff about Star Trek. Specifically, the first ones I saw were about the next generation movies, because the guy who does the videos, Mike Stoklas, is a huge fan of Star Trek and has like this encyclopedic knowledge of the entire franchise. And I was always kind of like into Star Trek, like I've seen Star Trek, but I was like, oh man, this is reminding me of how cool Star Trek is. I want to go and do a rewatch because that's the thing I can do now with the internet and
Hmm.
Netflix and all that stuff. So in around 2013, I started binge watching the original series because I figured I'll start at the beginning before the beginning got all switched around recently, and now it's Brave New Worlds, I think, is officially the beginning from a timeline. I don't even know. I don't even know anymore. But I was watching it and I was like, oh man, this is so cool. Like, you could totally make a game out of this. And then some other voice in my brain is like, there's already like 5 games about this. What are you doing? And so I was like, well, all right, let's see what happens. So I started, and I've seen a bunch of the other games like the FASA games, and I think it's Decipher and Last Unicorn. And one of the things that I liked about it is how they really get into the lore. But one of the things that I didn't really like about it is how crunchy it was. It's like all these numbers, and it's like you have to go through however many years of the academy, and then it gives you this many skill points and blah 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 blah. And I was like, no. That's not really what this game is about. Or what the show is about. So I basically was like, I'm sitting there with a notebook watching each episode, and I was like, all right, so Spock is the science officer, but Kirk knows science. So how do I model that in the game? And blah, 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 blah. And by the end of the series, I had a lot of notes, and some of them made sense, and I could still read my handwriting. And I went from there. And it took me, ironically, about 5 years before I got a reasonable prototype. And then it took me a while longer to get the money together for the art and the layout and stuff, and to finish up the product, which is typical of my perfect timing. I delivered in the height of pandemic in 2020. That was when I had my Kickstarter.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a rough time.
It was a rough time, but the good news is that people were home in front of their computers and bored. So I had a captive audience.
Well, that's good. So you said it was about 5 years from conceptualization to publication.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it
Now,
was. It was a lot of work, and it was a lot of like, because this is a thing that happens. I don't know. It happens to me. I don't know if it happens to other game designers, where you have this sort of in your mind, like, oh, these rules I'm making, they'll fit together perfectly, and it'll be this beautiful thing. And then it hits the table, and your players are like, I don't know what you're talking about, man. And this doesn't work, and this is too complicated, and we're never gonna, like, you even ignore half the rules most of the time. I was like, all right, so I'll take it back and put it back up and tinker with it and stuff. And it was nice because every time I played it, I learned more about the game and more about what I really wanted from it, like how to model those episodes and those types of stories. And I also played with a bunch of Trekkies who were like, no, you shouldn't do it this way. It would be cool if you did it this way. Or like, it would be funny if the humans were like this and not like this, because that's how it is on the show. And I'm like, you're right, that is how it is on the show. And then I would just write that into the rules.
Now, I think I saw in the book you tested it at Gen Con a few times, correct?
Yeah, a bunch of times with a bunch of complete strangers who didn't have to be nice to me.
Hopefully they were.
They were very nice, but there wasn't that that, well, I'm your friend, so I've got to be nice about it. But for the most part, it's been received very positively. People have really enjoyed it. And I have had, and I think this is the highest compliment that you can give to a game designer. I ran a playtest of it 1 year, and then the next year I sit down at the table for that year's playtest and adventure and whatever, and half the group was the same people from the year before. They're like, we remember you. Here we are. And I'm like, yeah.
That's awesome that they came back. So they obviously liked it, which is fantastic. And
yeah, really, it's really gratifying to make something that people like and are into and have fun with.
Yeah, well, it definitely seems fun, and I'm going to try to get my Sunday group that I play with to play here eventually. Like awesome. I was saying before we got going here, like, it's going to be fun, and I know people will have a blast playing it. So
I really hope so. That's my favorite thing, is hearing people are going to play it or are playing it, and listening vicariously to the adventures that they've had with the game. And that's always fun for me.
Yeah, I bet. So what made you decide to go with a D6 based system versus, I guess you'd say, the more traditional D20 based system for BoldlyGo?
So I know that there's game designers out there who use math and who know math and who are like, oh, well, the probability, like, distribution is this and this, and if you want this kind of, I don't really, I'm an English major. I'm one of those English majors who is not friends with math. There are English majors who are friends with math. I'm not one of them. And so any mathematical probabilistic elegance in my game is there completely by accident. And so I didn't want to use a 20-sided die because I wanted to stay away from sort of the D&D route, not because it's a bad route necessarily, but because it's like, then it's like, well, you've got stats and you've got skills and you've got this and you've got that. And I'm like, I want it to be simpler and more streamlined and more about like, people and talking and diplomacy rather than like all of this other stuff. And I was like, well, what kind of dice should I use? And at that time I was playing a lot of Arkham Horror, and Arkham Horror has this pretty simple dice mechanic where it's like, if you are doing something, you get to roll d6s, and you get to roll a number of d6s based on how good you are at the thing or the type of equipment that you have, and fives and sixes are successes. And so I was like, well, I'll steal that and I'll see how it goes. And however many 7, 8 years later, it kept working. So I'm still using it.
Yeah, it is pretty awesome. I like, if I remember correctly, 5 and 6 are successes. Anything else is a failure, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Which makes it very easy because I'm with you. I was an English major and math is not my friend either. So,
Yeah.
so what component of the game did you find was hardest for you to design?
That is a tough question. Let me think about that for a second. I think so. In the beginning, I had decided on a list of like 12 or 16 skills. And I said, okay, if you are this type of character, these are the skills you have, and these are the points you put in them, and whatever. And in one of the first play tests, a bunch of people said, we like this, but this isn't, and it feels like a science fiction game, but it doesn't feel like a Trek game. It's like, I don't think that I would have, like, I don't know that having a discrete skill in science, say, is what is the thing that is really emulating in the show, because it's like, yes, they're good at science, but it's like they're also like working together, and they're determined, and they're compassionate, and it's like, how does that come into it? And so I had off in another Word document, but working on this thing that became the trait system, which is the core system of the game, which is basically like, you have a list of traits. The traits can read as positive traits or negative traits, but they are things that are essential to you as a person, or your character as a person, however you want to separate that. And one of the things that I was playing around with is that a thing that you might think, or the character might think, is negative, is actually the thing that, turns out to be the thing that saves the day. Like, for instance, in the game that inspired me to write this, I was playing this, scientific mutation, like sort of like an X-Man mutant, where it's like, and one of the things that he had was like, you're not good at social situations with, unmodified humans, because you feel, for whatever reason, like you don't fit in, you never fit in, you're completely alienated from them. You think they think you're a monster and all this other stuff. So I was playing like this super angsty like guy in a trench coat, through the whole game. And at the end of the game, we got to this point where there was this cyborg who had lost his humanity and was breaking things. And it's like, well, we don't want to shoot him down. We could shoot him down. Let's try talking to him. And I said, okay, I know this isn't in the rules, but I feel like I'm an outsider. He's definitely feeling like he's an outsider. Can I use that to bridge the gap? And the GM's just like, the classic shrug. Sure, I guess. Yeah, that's whatever. That sounds cool. And so that was something I wanted to do in this system. And they said, hey, you're already kind of doing this in this other thing. Why not just put your chocolate in your peanut butter and make it work that way? And so I think it wasn't, I don't want to say that parts of the rules were harder to work on than other parts of the rules. I think it was more like the hardest part was finding the rules that I wanted to use to tell the stories that I wanted to tell. And that was kind of like stumbling around in the dark until I hit the like, oh, okay, it's these people and their abilities and their philosophies are pitted against these challenges, and it's how do I use what I have and what my friends have to solve this problem. And once I got that, it was much smoother sailing. which may not actually answer your question.
No,
I
it
don't
does.
know, but
Nope, it
that's what I
absolutely
got.
does. So we have Matthias Benici, it looks like, says, Geoff better say the alien race names, which actually segues perfectly into my next question I have. Because I wanted to know which species was your favorite, or is that more like asking a parent which child is their favorite? Can you pick one, or?
I don't have a favorite. I love them all equally, but that's an interesting question. I think my favorite are the Krakenoids. And for Matthias, who was picking on me before about having race names that you can't spell or pronounce, it's humans, synthoids, Ridians, who are the very,
Sloth.
very popular sloth people, hybrids, Krakenoids, Mordans, Gatoans, and I think that's 7. I think that's it.
Yep, I believe so. And I
With
was actually wondering, is the Gatoans kind of a play on the Spanish gato?
Yes, that's where I got the name from.
Okay, I was wondering
Yes.
that looking at that name today. And I was like, I bet you anything I'm like looking at El Gato.
Yes. See, because it's like it was always like it's Cadian or Kaitan or whatever. It's like let's mix it up a little bit. So I was like, oh, Gatoan. Yeah, there you go.
I love it. So now with this game, or I should say with BoldlyGo, players build a starship first before they actually build their characters.
That's right.
Can you give like a brief rundown of both processes for folks that have never seen or played BoldlyGo?
Sure. I'm happy to do that. And actually, this is just as an interesting aside. One of the things that I figured out through playtesting. Originally, I was just like, here's your sample ship, here's characters you can pick from, go play. And then at a couple of cons, I was like, well, let's actually test out the making stuff rules. So the first time I did this, I was like, make your characters, make your ship. And they were like, I think it will be easier for us to make the ship first, because making the ship sort of informs the type of people that would be on it, and that'll help us get into characters. So I did a cut and I did a paste, and so ship is first. So basically how that whole process works is everybody sits down at the table together and decides on the ship that you want to play. And there are a few archetypal ships in the game that you can pick from. So there's cruisers, which are basically warships, or science ships, or hospital ships, or research ships, experimental ships with weird technology in them, and that sort of thing. And so just quickly, everything in the game is governed by traits. And a trait, like I said before, is something notable about the ship. It could be either good or bad, but it's flexible depending on the situation. And so what happens is you sit down and you say, okay, we've got our ship. We've decided we want to be a diplomatic ship. So we're going to be the ones that they send out to handle disputes and talk to people and do first contacts. Or if you are a Lower Decks fan, second contact or whatever. And so depending on the number of people at the table, the players get a number of traits that they can add to the ship. And they go around, not necessarily in order, but they go around and are like, I want to pick this and I'll pick that. And do we want this or that kind of thing. And one of the things that's nice about it is it gets the players really thinking like, what do we want to do? What kind of adventures do we want to have? What scenarios would we be best at? And traits also can be applied to the ship as a whole. So one of the ones that you can pick, the sample in the book, is the Pride of the Fleet. So you're basically the Enterprise. It's like, that's the new one. Everybody wants to be on this one. And then there's ones that apply to specific systems. So it's like, I've got this, experimental AI that talks to me on the ship, or, we've got advanced weapons or whatever. And then there's traits that apply to the crew. So you've got like a crack security team or endless parade of red shirts or whatever. And sometimes the ships are very much in line with what you see on the show, and some shows, I should say, actually, the franchise. And sometimes they're like goofy. Like one of the ships was best of the worst. um, and they had a really disorganized hold, which was like you go down there and you're just like, oh my god, this place is a mess. But you could find anything in there. It's like, do we have an extra spoon? Yeah, here it is. It was in the hold. Nice. And so once you built your ship, then you build your characters. And so you're like, okay, well, this, like, what, for example, one of them is like, well, we've got this ship that is, has an AI, and it's the first like thinking AI on an Alliance ship like ever. So I'm going to be the character that babysits the AI and make sure it's happy so that we don't have a problem. And so you go around and you say, well, you pick one of the 7 species, then you pick one of the, I think, 9 or so occupations, and that's stuff like helm, engineering, medical, science, social science, all that other stuff. And if one of the players wants to be the captain, they can be the captain. And if nobody wants to be the captain, which happens about 50% of the time, I make an NPC captain, or the GM or the fleet admiral, the FA, makes a NPC captain that's sort of like, go out there, go on the away mission, find the glowing rock, bring it back, and we'll figure that out. And then once you're done with that, in order to flesh out the ship and to make sure that, like, because some players are like, okay, well, if we do this, and this, like, I wanted to be security and you want to be security, but then we have nobody in science, but I really wanted to be security, but I'll do science if you. It's fine. It's fine. You get to make what are called shipmates. Each person gets to make one, and it's an NPC that has a name, a occupation, and a unique trait. So it's like, well, this random ensign that we made is the scientist. So we're fine. We can both be security. And when we have science questions, we'll bring them along. And I have to say, shipmates are one of my favorite things because players are so creative with them. Like, there's this recurring character who's a Ridian. I think he's a technician. His name is Lieutenant Su, and he's just a very chill, like, I'm very good at fixing things, but it takes me a while because I'm a sloth person. And they're like, we love you, Sewell. You really bring a chill vibe to this. And he's like, yeah, it's awesome. And
That's fantastic.
we've had people with type A personalities. We have had a helmsman with anger issues, and it's just fun getting to be like, what character do they want me to play now? Okay. And then once you have all of that, you can boldly go title drop and see the universe. And that's that part of the game in a nutshell.
Nice. Sounds pretty fun to sit, like it would be a lot of fun to sit down with everybody and figure out what's going to happen with their characters in the ship. And it's funny that you were talking about playing the Ridian that way, because that's exactly how I pictured them in my head when I was reading about, I believe it was the medical officer.
Yes.
It's the pre-gen that is a Ridian. And I'm like, I was kind of picturing the sloth from Zootopia. I don't know. And I was almost picturing like a helmsman that liked to just go like warp 9 that talks like this when they're not.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because one of the games that I ran at a con, and I don't know how or why this happened, but everybody at the table was playing a Ridian except for one person who decided to play the human crew member.
Oh man.
And so he was like, I think somebody upstairs doesn't like me. And to punish me, they put me on a ship full of sloth people. And they're like, yeah, we'll take care. And he's like,
yeah, my friend Chief that was mentioning playing Not William Riker has chimed in the chat with his ship name of USS Not Enterprise.
That's allowed. That's fine. But if Paramount Solaris come knocking at your door, I had nothing to do with it.
So, who and or what, because I know they're not all physical beings per se, are some of the NPC / adversaries that players can encounter in BoldlyGo?
So I tried to make adversaries that were similar to, but copyright distinct from, the ones that you see in the franchise. And I also wanted to do my own spin on it. And I'm a big gamer nerd. I played a lot of science fiction games, and I had a lot of aliens like on scratch paper. So I was like, ooh, this one, ooh, this one. So I think the big three, as of right now, for species that are almost always antagonistic in some way. So there's the Vatizar. The Vatizar are these people who they have 4 eyes, 2 normal vision eyes, and 2 underneath that see in the ultraviolet spectrum. And they have kind of a fascist empire, the Vatizar Imperium, which has a border zone around it because there was just a war, and that was the establishment at the end of the war. It's like, you don't go here and we don't go here, and mostly we're fine. Their big thing is they want to be the best of the best of the best of the best, and so in order to do that, they keep upgrading themselves with cybernetic parts, and their greatest warriors and their most loyal soldiers are what in the book it's called their dragoons, where they have basically been permanently bonded into these huge suits of power armor. So they're not human, but they're not organic anymore. They're these machines with organic brains. And they're very sort of operatic, like 1950s serials mustache twirling, sci-fi bad guys, like, I've got you this time, Picard, that kind of thing. And they like getting into fights and proving that they're the best and shooting the biggest guns and whatever. And so there is more to their culture than that. That's just sort of the brief overview in the book. But they're like, we're the warlike race that loves fighting, and you're going to have to deal with us a lot because we're spoiling for a fight and you're right next door. So the other one is the Zakuun. The Zakuun are I did not actually picture them this way, but when I was describing them during a game, someone was sketching them and he turned them into little, like, squat bodied shark people. So that's what they look like in my head now. So they are a group or a species that are all paranoid and have this Byzantine political structure where they're all trying to get one over on the other one, and they don't trust one another, but they're also xenophobic and they don't trust outsiders, and they trust themselves slightly more than they trust the outsiders. And so there's a lot of tension in their society because nobody ever says what they really mean, and nobody really knows what anybody else wants. And they're all walking around with their daggers half drawn all the time, just waiting for an attack. And they're a little bit more isolationist and very protective of their borders and stuff. And whenever, like, the players encounter them, the Zakuun are like, what are you doing here? Oh, you're exploring, huh? That's all you're doing? Right. Yeah, you didn't know about the power in the middle of the planet that we're going to bleed for our own purposes. You just happen to show up here and build a science station. I do, da 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 da. And then the last one is they are the Kelgarans, who are a species of lizard-like people. And in their backstory, they come from a planet called Gara, which was wiped out by some cosmic catastrophe. The planet's gone. So they have been, in the last 1,000 years, let's say, searching the galaxy for a new place to call their own. And so they're very clannish and they're very honorable. And I have to thank my friend Dave Kalis, who wrote several modules for the upcoming BoldlyGo Season 1 campaign book, who really fleshed them out and gave them a lot more complexity and personality. They're very proud and they're very honorable, and they think that pretty much everybody else is just not as good or not as reliable or not as trustworthy as they are. And so they basically go around the galaxy in these ships and they salvage technology from other ships and add it to their own. And they're just like, we're just trying to find a place to live. Don't bother us. Don't help us. And don't get in our way. And everything should be fine. And so it may not sound necessarily like it from the pitch that I'm giving now because it's sort of scattered. But the idea was creating the antagonists who, in respect to the source material, are like, I can see why you and I are going to have problems, but I understand where you're coming from. And the trick in this situation is for me to find a way to deal with this problem without just like shooting you. which is how a lot of these things would go, like in other games. It's like, oh, they're blocking our way to the treasure. Well, let's stab them. And this is like, no, let's talk about that. Maybe something else is going on. Maybe we can reach a, third option, that kind of thing. And so far it's worked pretty well. And people have really liked the idea of being like, all right, it's fairly clear that this is a problem. How do we get around it without causing more problems? Kind of thing.
So diplomacy is encouraged.
Yeah, diplomacy.
Which is good.
Friendship.
So even though we just said diplomacy, can you tell me how combat works in BoldlyGo?
Sure.
Both ship and between players and their adversaries, I guess.
Sure.
Would be.
So they actually work similarly. And I'll do players first because it's smaller scale and it's easier to see. So everybody has a bunch of wound levels. And once you lose all your wound levels, you fall unconscious. And if you have been stunned, there's a good chance you'll get up again and you'll be fine. And if you have been taken deadly wounds and you fall down, there's a good chance that you're going to die dramatically unless they get you to a med bay or, use your salt shaker hypodermic needle on you or whatever and bring you back up. In combat, you basically, actually, let me back up. So how you do rolls in the game is essentially you say, this is what I want to do. Here's all of the traits that I think will help me do this. So then you say, all right, I get 1 die for each of these traits plus 1 die because I'm a person doing a thing. And you always get that 1 die no matter how few traits you have. And then you take a big pile and you roll it and you count the successes. The more successes you get, the better you do. So combat works the same way. It's like, what do I need to do to shoot this guy or double fist over the back punch this guy or duck out of the way or do a roll across the floor or whatever. And you roll and they roll and whoever gets the most successes wins. At that point, you have 2 options. The first thing you can do is you can wound them. And so if you punch them, it's like a stun wound. You can shoot them with your razor, your ray laser. And if it's set on stun, you stun them. If it's set on deadly, you do a deadly wound. But the other thing that you can do is you can apply temporary traits. And so this is where it's not very tactical, but it's a little tactical. Where you could say, I don't want to hurt this guy, but I want to knock him over, or I want to blast his weapon out of his hand, or I want to throw sand in his eyes or whatever, so that like the fight doesn't continue, or I get an advantage, or I can run away without him hurting me or me hurting him. And so what happens is you say, okay, now he has the trait blinded by sand. And that's a temporary trait because it only lasts as long as the condition lasts. So once he scrapes the sand out of his eyes, he can see again. But until then, you get to basically say, okay, I know that he is blinded by sand, which gives me an extra dice because he can't see what I'm doing.
Ah.
And so you can basically say, I could turn this into a slugfest or a shootout, or I can get it to a point where like I have made this individual incapable of hurting me and have won the fight that way. The other thing is that you can also take temporary traits and you can also get wounded. And this brings me to my favorite rule in the book. This was inspired by William Shatner's wonderful acting, and it's called the torn uniform rule, which is that in the event that you take damage or a temporary trait which will limit you, you can instead dramatically tear a hole in your uniform and you just ignore it. You only get one of those per uniform, but it looks awesome on film. It looks like you're really struggling. So ship combat is roughly the same in that regard, where it's like you roll, I roll, we apply. The big difference is that ship combat is slower in a way because everybody on a ship who's a player gets to take it an action. And so it's like, I'm going to shoot the guns, I'm going to raise the shields, I'm going to fix the engine, I'm going to do this. And so there's all these, sub actions on a turn. But basically what happens is if you fire your ship razors and hit another ship, they take damage based on how strong their shields are. So if their shields are at full, everybody just does this. And then it's fine. And then if there's no shields, then you do horrendous damage to the ship. Like, their engine's gone. We totally got them, guys. Yeah. And there's, levels in between. So what happens is that you get hit, you take damage based on your shield strength, then you roll to see how much your shields are reduced. And so each time your shields get reduced, then so like the first time it's like you're shaking around, but our shields degrade. The second time it's we take a minor damage, which means the players or the people on the ship get to choose like, no, that didn't hit the engines, that hit the coffee maker. Coffee maker's offline, everybody. And then it's major damage, which is the attacker gets to decide, no, it's engines. And then catastrophic is your engines are gone and you can't repair them until you're out of the battle. And also the battle's probably over. But one thing about that, and this is, again, something that I got from watching the show, is that shields start out at 100%. They drop really quickly. Then when they get to about 20%, they're always like, shields at 20%. And 15 minutes later, shields at 18%. So you lose the first few levels of shield really easily. And when you get to the last fraction at the end, they're almost invincible. so it's just very dramatic, and there's smoke and the flashing lights. And yeah, I'm a big nerd. I watch a lot of Star Trek.
So Matthias was actually asking, are there any mirror events?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I will say that in BoldlyGo Season 1, there will be something similar to a mirror event. And more than that, I will not say right now because of spoilers, but it does happen.
Excellent. That sounds really fun. So, so adventures in BoldlyGo are called episodes. And we've already touched on this, really, that you do have Season 1 coming out.
Yes.
You said that has already gone out to backers, or that is in the process of going out to backers?
That is still in the process of being written.
Oh, okay.
I'm actually, I would say about 80% done. There are several people who are working with me writing episodes. Those episodes are almost finished. And then I've got episodes that I have to do that are almost finished. And then once I get that and do a little play testing, I'd like to start getting art for it and putting it together and doing another Kickstarter. And when that's done, it's basically going to be, I think the final count now is 16 episodes. You're going to start at the very, very beginning of your career as cadets doing your final training exercise before graduation. And then it goes through this whole story. And about half the episodes are part of this linked arc where plot points and characters carry over. And then they're sprinkled in with like one-offs, like, you're on a planet or you answer a distress call and it has nothing to do with the overarching plot, but it's like classic, like moral dilemma, morality play kind of stuff.
Nice.
The thing that I was talking to you about before that is almost done, that Matthias helped me with, because he did layout for this project and he did a really great job, and I can't wait for everybody to see it, is BoldlyGo, the coronavirus episodes.
Ah, yes, that is what you are talking about prior to.
So that's basically, I think, 7 episodes that I created and ran during lockdown for various groups of friends. And then I typed up the episodes more formally, so they're not just my hand scratch notes on the backs of napkins, and sent them out to my Kickstarter backers as just like a little sweetening of the pot. It's like, thanks for backing me. Here's a bunch of episodes that you can use if people want to play this game and you don't have any time to write anything. And so now it's this finished book with art that you'll be able to get from Drive-Thru RPG as soon as they tell me it's good and I can publish it.
Nice. Speaking of episodes, you also have a random episode generator in the core rulebook.
I do, yeah.
What can you tell me about that?
So, back to the beginning of our conversation, I sat down and I wrote down a lot of notes when I was watching Star Trek, and Star Trek has, especially in the original series, has a lot of kinds of stories and characters and story beats that they go back to. There's like a stable of characters and scenarios. And so I said, okay, I'm going to write all these down. And so I divided them up into 4 charts. So there's this sheet here, got my rule book, so I don't have to remember everything. So basically I have it set up into 4 tables, and you roll what old school traveler people like to call a D66, where you roll 2d6 and it generates up to 36 different results. So the first table will generate the special guest star. So that includes anybody from like a demanding ambassador or an unstoppable monster or an invasion force or obnoxious children. And if you have a good memory of the original series, you know which episodes those are from.
Yes.
And so that's the NPC that is going to show up in this episode. And the second one is the A plot, which is the main story. And that's stuff like some crew members are abducted, or there's a distress call, or the players must go undercover to stop an enemy state, or the ship is frozen in space or time by mysterious forces. And so that's the big action, the high stakes part of the episode, or the adventure, or whatever you want to call it. And then the third table is the B plot, which is like on Next Generation, it's like, oh no, the ship's falling apart and Data has a poetry reading and nobody wants to go. So it's lower stakes, character driven, nice little bite-sized story that is fun to interact with. And that's well, not necessarily fun, but it's like even more powerful. Aliens intervene, the crew pursues a ship, a festival or holiday, it's time for shore leave, and stuff like that. And then table 4, the last one, is the setting. And that runs the gamut of like a world that is obviously an Eden analog, a planet ravaged by an apocalypse, a penal colony, a star base, enemy territory, and so on. And I forget where it is, but one of these is, I like to throw in Easter eggs all the time, and if it only makes me laugh, it's fine. But if other people find them and laugh, that's great too. Yes, one of the A plots can be a plot that is loosely based on the story of Moby Dick, because they love their Moby Dick in Star Trek.
They do indeed. Yeah, it's funny that you said that, because reading through this book, there were so many little things that I saw in there that just made me giggle. And I'm like, oh boy, I love how he just went around the Paramount lawyers with this one, but got the reference in. And now Donatello Man is saying Captain Not Kirk T. Riker Day.
Perfect. You're a role model.
Yep, and like I said, he's got not Riker planned for when we get
Right.
to play this. So the last question I had, and then we can talk more about things that we may have missed or whatever,
Sure.
or that I may have missed. Do you plan on offering any kind of third-party license for folks such as myself who may be interested in publishing episodes of their own? Or is that something
So
you've considered?
I have, and I actually licensed the rule set early last year to someone who was interested in doing their own game with the same sort of core mechanics, because one of the things that they liked about it is that the mechanics in this game, they're sort of designed so that, like, if the players are all working together to solve a problem and pooling their abilities to get over a horrible problem, that's on brand, and that's winning. So they like that, so they're doing that. And I think I would really love to figure out the best way to do third party stuff, because I mean, it is fun and gratifying, and all kinds of other positive words to write this stuff and to write episodes and to run them for people. But it is just as gratifying to hear that, like, oh, I decided that I want to do a Deep Space Nine, campaign. And so here's all of my hacks and tweaks and whatever for, like, this is how you're going to live on a space station and deal with the problems there. And it's a different environment with slightly different rules, and here's the characters and stuff. And or just like, yeah, I did this and everybody had a great time. And I would really like to get, as many people as want to be involved. And I love seeing what other people come up with, because, like, it's noisy in my head and I got a lot going on upstairs, but I can't think of everything, and I'm locked into whatever's up here. But when I get to see someone who's like, I took your thing and I made this, and I'm like, I never would have thought in a million years to make this. This is great. Like, you should share this with people, So I would, and because, like, gaming is by nature collaborative, more collaboration is always better.
I agree. So one other thing I've got to ask you, because we weren't live when I asked you about this, is where did you get that sweet ass uniform that you're wearing right now?
So, for those of you who don't know, this is not what I usually wear. This is a uniform that is based on the uniforms that you can see on the cover of the book. All of this art is by the amazing Dave Woodward, and he designed these uniforms, and they're great and lovely. And so my mom, who is amazing and talented, and a quilter and a tailor par excellence, one year for Christmas, I said, could you maybe make one of these for me? So this is my one-of-a-kind Fleet Admiral uniform that I, wear to cons and sometimes to interviews, and look like a huge dork and promote my game.
You do not look like a dork at all. It is so awesome. So
Thank you. I appreciate that. But yeah, so that's where I got it from.
So is there anything that we haven't talked about regarding the game that you would like to touch on?
Well, I can tell you about some other stuff that I've got going on for it. This is product placement, but I'll try not to make it too product placement-y.
Oh, you can make it as product placement-y as you want. So.
All right, then. So I want to say that in addition to the main rule book, which you can get on DriveThruRPG, I also, with the help of Matthias, made this incredible Fleet Admiral screen. There's not that many rules, but the ones that we have are all on the inside for easy reference. I just did, well, I'm responsible for the text. This handy dandy folder thing is actually from DriveThru, and you can use it for all of your game stuff. You just slide stuff in and out. and it has an extra panel, which turned out to be a good thing, because one of the things that I had wanted to do for a long time and actually finished up just this year is, so for those of you who know about Star Trek, there's that episode Assignment Earth where they go back in time and they meet Gary Seven, and Gary Seven is like the main character of that show that never got made, but he's like this augmented human and he goes around time solving problems. Well, I was like, oh man, it would be great if that was a thing. And so I made a supplement called Somewhere in Time, which allows you to do time travel stuff in your BoldlyGo game. And among the characters you can play are analogs for like Gary Seven and his cat. and there's some new adversaries and new allies and different time traveling factions and rules for like what happens when you meet yourself. And what happens if you shoot or become your own grandpa, that kind of thing. And just because because it's science fiction-y and Star Trek is all kinds of different science fiction all at once, there's a lot of time travel. So I wanted to devote some real estate to that too. And that was a lot of fun to write. And I'm hoping to play test that soon and see if other people like it. But
Sounds
yeah,
fun to
so
me.
between that and the coronavirus episodes in season 1, I almost have a product line, which is not something that I ever thought I would have, but hooray!
Yeah, that's very cool.
Thanks.
And I will make sure that I put a link to the Drive-Through RPG page for BoldlyGo.
Oh, thank you.
After we're done, so folks can find it. This is a great book, easy to navigate, and it's going to be fun. I'm going to get Donatello Man here to play, and we'll do Captain Not Kirk T. Riker Day.
And I hope he has fun standing awkwardly on things and jumping over chairs to sit down.
Oh boy. So before we part ways for the evening, why don't you tell folks where they can find out more about BoldlyGo, Geoff Quest, and also your novellas that you write?
Oh, yes. So when I'm not busy making games, I also write books. I have 3 books available. Well, novellas, like you said, so short books. One of them is a rewrite of the infamously terribly written story, The Eye of Argon, which I wanted to write to redeem the sadly now departed Peter Tice's writing career, because there is a good story in The Eye of Argon. It's just not very well told. And I also have 2 other books that are my own IP for once. It's sort of a Sword and Planet / steampunk style universe, which features a mysterious wandering swordsman named Gray and the people he helps. And you can find all of that and more stuff on my website, which is GeoffQuest, GeoffQuest.com. You can find the books on Amazon. I self-publish through there. And you can also find all of my game stuff on Drive-Through RPG. And there are links on my website that will take you to all of those places, because that's what a website's for.
Excellent. And I will make sure I put links to everything in the description for you so that folks have an easier time finding your website and all of your awesome books and games and all of that. Now, when do you plan on launch? Well, you said you still have a lot to write, so you probably answered this and I'm just being a space cadet. Do you have a rough idea of when you're going to launch the Kickstarter for episode or season 1?
So I would like to do that sort of maybe second half of this year. So maybe like sometime September-y, maybe. We'll see if I can pull it all together, though. It's a lot of work, but I would like to get out there, and I would like to get the Somewhere in Time supplement out sometime maybe first half of this year, like May, June. We'll see how that goes too.
Well, I will be on board for everything. You can count on me.
Thank you. That's great.
Well, that was all I had tonight. So
okay.
Thank you so much for joining me. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we turn off the stream?
No, not really. I get super self-conscious about talking about myself, and I feel like I've done more than enough. So yes, I just want to say though, thank you for having me on the show, and shout out to Chanel for putting us together. And thank you. This has been great.
Yeah, I had a blast. And if you don't mind hanging out for a few minutes after I end the stream, we can talk a little bit more, and that would be great.
All right, sounds great.
All right, well, thanks for joining us, folks, and thanks for Matthias and Donatello Man for chiming in with the chat and getting some more questions going. And